Hello, and welcome to 8 Days. Welcome back to 8 Days of Diana Wynne Jones. I'm Rebecca Framo.
And I'm Emily Tesh, and today we are going to be talking about The Time of the Ghost, published in 1981.
Yes, I think that's right. Uh, and, well, so I think we said when we were prepping this one that before we even started talking about this book, we have to go back to reflections and some of the quotes that Diana Wynne Jones has said about her own life. Because while a lot of Diana Wynne Jones books have kind of a couple of central myths that they're organized around, the myth that this one is really organized around is the myth of Diana Wynne Jones, maybe more than any of her others.
Right. Jones describes this book as semi-autobiographical. There are several events, several episodes in it which are taken directly from her autobiographical sketches in her essays. The Time of the Ghost is a book about a weird family of four sisters. Diana Wynne Jones was one of three sisters, and we'll talk a little bit about that change. But
Yes.
it is, in many ways, autobiographical.
Yes. It's a book. So the sisters, Diana Wynne Jones had two sisters named Ursula and Imogen.
No,
Image
Ursula and Isabel.
Isabel. Oh my god, I've done it already.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be doing this
Imogen is
all
the
the way.
fictional version.
I'm gonna be doing this all the way through this recording. Ursula, it's Isabel is the real version. And was the next youngest after Diana Wynne Jones. Diana Wynne Jones was the oldest. We've talked a lot in previous years about how Diana Wynne Jones's feelings about being the parentified oldest child sort of crop up again and again throughout her work. Isabel was the middle one. Ursula was the youngest one. She describes Isabel as beautiful, and Isabel or Ursula as incredibly funny. Um, a white waif child with black hair and a commanding personality. And because of their particular traits, Isabel being beautiful and Diana Wynne Jones herself being brainy, their mother sort of had a plan for all of them, a destiny that they were going to carry out.
Or at least this is how Jones remembers it. And I think it is, so much of this book, Time of the Ghost, is about interpretation and reinterpretation of the past. It is notable that Jones's own sons, in their sort of reflections on their mother, which are published at the end of the Book of Reflections as kind of a chaser, seem to have a slightly different view of the family history than Jones herself does. And they say that their aunts have a different view as well.
Yes.
So a lot of this book is about different people's interpretations of the same events or the same
Yeah.
memories.
Something that, and we'll get a little bit to the past and interpretation of memories and events of the past as we talk about the plot of this book. I think you pointed out, and were very smart to say it, that it is very striking that this is the first. She writes Spellcoats, which is her first real female POV book, which is about telling and interpreting the past. And then her next book that she writes about about a teenage girl, is in many ways about telling and re-envisioning, I think in a very real way, her own past. So in Time of the Ghost, we have four sisters who are like Diana Wynne Jones, live sort of at their parents run a school and have very little time for them. And the one so oh my god, I'm trying to, like, I guess we can say from the start that the sister that doesn't exist in that doesn't map directly to Diana Wynne Jones's real life is probably the sister we spend the most time
No, I
thinking
completely
about.
disagree. I completely disagree because I don't think Sally is an invention or an addition to the dynamic of three sisters. I think what we have here again is the Jones doubled self.
Mm-hmm.
So, in real life, three sisters Diana, Isabel, and Ursula. In the book, four sisters Charlotte, known as Cart, who is brainy, tall, fat, difficult to live with, very clever, always reading a book.
Yep.
Sally or Selina, the second sister, who is anxious, motherly in some ways, constantly nagging the others to be good and to behave
Mhm.
themselves, constantly tidying up after them and complaining that no one helps her. Then the third sister is Imogen, who's is destined to be a concert pianist because her mother thinks she looks so beautiful sitting at the piano.
Right, her
The
beautiful
younger sister,
profile.
right, and the younger sister is Fenella, who is, I think, very straightforwardly a fictionalized Ursula, in the same way that Imogen is a fictionalized Isabel. That keep
Right.
track of the characters, but the question mark hangs around these two oldest sisters, Cart and Sally, Charlotte and Selena. Which of these is Diana Wynne Jones? I would say it is both of them. I think she's cut herself in half.
Yeah, you are right. You are right. She has. But I think the thing that is most striking of all the differences between Cart and Sally, the thing that is most striking is that Cart knows that their parents are abusive, and Sally believes that their parents are perfect. And this is, I think, the central dividing trait that sets up a lot of the themes of the rest of the book, is that Sally Sally does not want to or is not able to recognize what is very clear abuse. And that's going to set up what happens to Sally throughout the rest of the book.
Right, and the experience of abuse these sisters have is an experience of terrible neglect. So their parents mostly ignore them, and we see this over and over again. There's sequences where the girls find there's been no food left for their supper, so they have to go next door and ask the school kitchen to give them leftovers, and the school cook says, well, you can't have that, that's not for you, and then if they don't get the school food, there'll be nothing. Or the fact that the younger sister, Fenella, wears unbelievably ugly clothes, hand sewn by Cart, because all the actual clothes have fallen apart after being handed down through the older three sisters, and there's nothing left for Fenella to wear. Or the detail that Fenella has, in fact, tied her hair into literal knots over her face, and nobody has done anything about it.
Yep.
Uh, all of this stuff is taken from Jones's autobiography. She describes this sort of sneaking in to steal food from the school kitchen. She describes hand making her younger sister's clothes herself. And she describes the episode where Ursula tied her hair in knots and they were just left there for
Yes.
months.
And what she actually says in Reflections is, I found I had to tone down both the hanging incident and the knots in the hair episode. No one would have believed the reality. And in the book, these episodes do not read as toned down, so she might have had a point. But when we first meet the parents, so the book begins when one of these sisters has found herself as sort of a disembodied spirit. Uh,
I think, and this is possibly just what I'm reading at the moment, I think Diana Wynne Jones read Roger Zelazny Chronicles of Amber sometime in the early 1980s. And it's kind of there because Amber begins with a main character who's been in a terrible accident and can't remember anything. And then in Zelazny's version, he then bluffs his way into a lot of information by cunningly confronting his sister. Uh, but Ghost begins the same way. The character wakes up and thinks there's been an awful accident. There's been an accident,
yes.
and that's the only thing she can remember. And it just it tickled me as a nod. There are other books Jones does which are a clearer reflection or tribute of Amber. But this one, I do think, borrows a setup.
Yeah, that's my next on my to read list because I feel like I need to read it to prep for the rest of the 80s. But the one thing that Ghost knows about herself, I think the very first thing that she thinks about herself is, I'm the sensible one. So she knows, I think from the start, the thing that she knows about herself is that she exists in relation to, she is one of many. Of the one of many, she is the sensible one. Now, when we meet the sisters, we realize that several of them could conceivably think of themselves as the sensible one.
I think all of them consider themselves the only sane person in the house.
Do you think that's true of Fenella?
No, I think Fenella actually, especially in the later part of the book, is like revealed as one of the most rational actors. She's like, yeah, you don't understand how to handle our father. You have to cajole him. Um, I getting what I want out of this. I'm doing what I want. So yes, she's introduced as like a deformed little goblin figure crouching on the sink in her green sack that Cart's made for her with her hair tied in knots. She seems totally mad, but actually she's a perfectly reasonable 10-year-old coping with a totally mad situation.
I mean, they're all perfectly reasonable 10-year-olds coping with deeply mad situations in the deeply mad situation in their own. They're not all perfectly reasonable 10-year-olds. Several of them are several years older than 10, and that's important. Um, but we will get there. But anyway, so the ghost starts sort of exploring her terrain, whirling around, trying to ground herself and gain shreds to her identities. And the first people that she sees are her parents. What she says about her father is for some reason she knew him enormously well. Every line of his bristly head, his bird like face, and his thin, angry body were known to her exactly. She felt drawn to him, but she was afraid of him too. She knew he was always impatient and nearly always angry. A name for him came to her. They called him himself. And then what she says about her mother is she looked like an avenging angel who had already had a long fight with the devil. All the same, the papers that she was looking at should have withered and turned black. The bodiless person in the corridor felt a yearning admiration for this angel lady. She knew they called her Phyllis. So she doesn't call either of them mother or father yet. She doesn't do that until Phyllis, who is actually the first person to sense her presence. The one time, perhaps, that Phyllis actually pays attention to her or to any of her daughters really deeply in the entire book until the very end, calls her Sally, and then she thinks, and that's how the ghost initially identifies herself as Sally, because Phyllis has felt a Sally like presence, kind of assumed that her daughters come to bother her, scolded her, and then realized that no one is there and gone back to her work. And in that moment, she calls her mother, and that's how we know who these people are.
Right. And it's really sort of striking the. I mean, this is even more than usual. This is a point of view book. It's a book that breaks a lot of rules, a lot of expectations about what a children's book should do. This ghost is the most inactive, this most lacking in agency protagonist imaginable. She literally can't do anything. She spends most of a chapter trying to knock over a bin. And when she does manage to knock over the bin, she then can't read any of the stuff she was trying to read inside it. This Ghost also, she does start calling herself Sally, but this is questioned a lot early on. We don't definitively find out which sister she is until like chapter 12 of this 14 chapter book. It's left really, really late because the conceit of total alienation from your identity, total absence from yourself, runs the whole way through. Sally
Yeah,
at the start is a ghost. She's nothing except the name that her mother has pinned on her, which she clings to. Oh, yes, that must be me. I'm Sally. But she doesn't know anything about Sally because Sally is the sister who isn't there.
right.
And
Which, of
actually,
course,
our ghost goes, oh, they've murdered Sally, possibly.
right.
That
these
seems like
hard
a thing that might have happened.
these horrible monsters that are my sisters, because when she first sees her sisters, the first thing she thinks about them all is how monstrous they look. Fenella is the 10-year-old is a horrible little dwarf in a green sack with big insects tied over, on her head, or her hair tied up in sort of big insect antennae. Cart is the description of Cart is so good. I'm going to grab it out directly because we've talked before about uh, Diana Wynne Jones's discomfort with bodies, with her own body, with the body of little girlhood, with the body of womanhood. And when we get Cart,
Oh, I've got it. Charlotte was just as much of a shock to Sally as their dog Oliver had been. She was built on the same massive scale. Like Oliver, she was huge and blurred. Blurred fair hair stuck out round her head. A blurred face, like a poor photograph of the angel Phyllis, floated in the hair. She was the size of a tall, fat woman, and cased in a dress that had clearly been designed for a little girl. There was about her, blurred and vast, the feeling of a powerful personality, which, like her lumping body, had somehow got itself cased in the mind of a little girl.
yeah, there's no question in my mind that this is a self-portrait. Like it's clearly and obviously and so powerfully a description of a way that Diana Wynne Jones has felt.
Yeah, it's the experience of being too big that she talked about in her essays when she's talking about writing female protagonists, the discomfort with being in a female body that sticks out all over the place and is too big and too wrong and too ugly. Cart is too big for the person she's supposed to be. She's a tall, fat woman stuck in a little girl's dress. She's a big, strong personality stuck in a little girl's mind. And I agree with you. I think it's a self-portrait, but it is not a kind self-portrait
No,
at all.
neither Cart nor Sally are kind self portraits. The whole book, none of the book, I think, is a kind, particularly kind portrait to anybody there. It's a powerful portrait. But she even says that one of the things that she did not capture in Time of the Ghost is what I think I failed to get over in that book was how close we three sisters were. We spent many hours delightedly discussing one another's ideas and looked after one another strenuously. And while this is, I think, ultimately a book about it is ultimately a book about the way these sisters love each other, and the fact that their love for each other is what keeps them alive and together. To get there, you have to get through a lot of how miserable it is to be living with three other adolescents when you yourself are also a miserable adolescent.
Right, this is a book about how they all love each other, but how also they
Yeah,
all hate each other. And there's a really great sequence where the three sisters whom the ghost has found, Cart, Imogen, and Fenella, are sitting round the table having a sort of horrible sisterly squabble. And one of them just sets back, pauses and said, "This is the moment when Sally would shriek, 'I hate you all.'" And the ghost was just in the process of
right.
going, "I hate
And
you
that is, I
all!"
think, our first and strongest clue, or there are several clues, and the ghost is indeed Sally. It's put into question throughout much of the middle of the book, but for the first couple chapters, when she's just existing, after she sort of gets this identification of Sally, as she moves among her sisters, desperately trying to figure out what's happened to her and to make them hear her, there are various moments where she finds herself thinking, like the "I hate you all" moment, thinking and identifying with the things that they are describing what Sally would do, what Sally is like. And the ghost does those things at the same time. I think there's a really interesting sort of process of collective identity making. She feels and knows like she is herself when she is the role that she plays in this foursome.
Right, and I think increasingly throughout the book you get the sense of Sally as a product of her community, a product of the other people around her. The ghost, when she does finally acquire any kind of body in the world of the sisters, it's because I don't want to get onto the blood sacrifice
Yeah.
too early. It's because of blood sacrifice. We'll go into that in more
Yes.
detail, but her body is donated to her, is given to her by others. Her selfhood is given to her by
Right.
others.
But first, she has to sort of spend this time without a self. And I do think it is so, so striking that we come to this book right after Magicians of Caprona, which is about a loving family where as soon as you shout, someone comes to pay attention to you and try and fix what's wrong. And the entirety of this book is Sally the ghost shouting and shouting and shouting and desperately trying to make herself heard, and to convey the fact that she is in terrible danger and she doesn't know who she is, and nobody can hear her. Nobody will pay attention. She has to go to incredibly extraordinary measures, like use all of her effort to make any impact on her family, on the world.
Right. I think thinking sort of structurally about the book, this really jumped out at me when I was rereading it last night. I should say, by the way, that Time of the Ghost is possibly my favourite Diana Wynne Jones. I think it's an extraordinary book. I think it's brilliant. I've written essays about it
I'm
before.
gonna link them in the show notes because the essay that you wrote is really, really good.
So what I was thinking about on this reread was structure, and it's a short book. It's a 200-page book, 14 chapters, and the first 7 chapters are one continuous narrative of this ghost exploring the world of the sisters, who they are, what they do, and a lot of it is very. I think I said to you it could be a play, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
in fact, I think it would make a fantastic play. I would love to see this staged. And the ghost plays the role of the audience because she lacks
Yes.
so much agency. She can't do anything else. The ghost watches everything playing out as an audience member. And some of it is extraordinarily funny.
Oh
Some of it is
yes.
remarkably horrible. Some of it is both very funny and very horrible. But she gets to know her sisters, she gets to know the school, she sneaks into bits of school she hasn't seen before, she breaks in on a Latin lesson that her father is teaching at the school. I should mention, the girls don't go to this school. This is a boys' boarding school. So it is sort of an old fashioned, quite fancy education for young men. The girls have to catch the bus like to a different village to go to a local school.
Right. And at
Um,
one point she says, I think so she accidentally she confuses the boys class for her own class and then is horribly embarrassed. But she says, the boys school is more real to me than my own school because that's what consumes all her parents' time and attention and energy.
Right. So you get Sally's ghost experience of the three sisters, of the parents, of the school, of the boys, and it is revealed that some of these young men in the school seem to be having just as miserable a life as the girls stuck out in what was formerly the school stables, which is where they live.
Yes.
Um, and you get sort of some of the teenage boys from the school sort of sneaking over to spend time with the sisters. And there's a little group of three of them. There's Ned Jenkins, who is the artistic one and does cartoon drawings of the family dog Oliver. There's Will Howard, whom they all call Howard because it's a boys' boarding school, so everyone exists by surname.
And we're
Howard,
not allowed to look forward, but Howard draws spaceships.
I think there must have been a real Howard at some point who drew pictures of spaceships because this is turning up.
Yeah.
We'll see this again. And there is an older boy, a fifth former, which I had to sort of do a bit of counting in my head because we don't use most of these terms anymore, but a fifth former is, I think, about 15.
Yes.
And his name is Julian Adaman, and he's almost always referred to by first name and surname.
Yes. There is something different about Julian Adaman, and there is something different about Julian Adaman. I don't think Julian Adaman shows up in any of her other books. All
Which
of
is
her,
odd because he is a remarkably striking portrait.
yeah, and like all of her other characters, even in this book, which is perhaps especially in this book, which is so strongly autobiographical, you can see templates for where they're popping up. Bits and pieces of them are like Fenella, for example, is just such the archetypal youngest sibling who is in creative and menacing and the
I
best
think
weapon against
Fenella
your
is
enemies.
arguably a not particularly distinct character from Duck in the spell codes.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. We've
This
seen Fenella
brilliant witted youngest.
at least twice already. We've seen Fenella. Fenella is Duck and Fenella is Johnny, and we're gonna see Fenella again. But Julian Adaman never appears before, never appears after.
Now, I think it is possible to claim that Julian Adaman has maybe a prototype in Cousin Ronaldo in The Magicians of Caprona.
Yes.
Julian Adaman is characterized, even as a 15-year-old boy, by a sense of power. The moment he comes into a room, he is in control of that room, not because he's bossy or demanding. He just has a natural ability to take control of a group of people. A sense of danger, terrible danger, like a wild animal, is the way the ghost describes it at one point. And he is a bestial threat. And also a sense of terrible sexual attraction.
Yes.
And in
He's
fact,
dark and straight.
explicitly suicidal sexual attraction. Being into this man is self destructive. And both Cart and Sally, that is, the two sisters who represent Diana, are keen on Julian Adaman.
Yes. The first thing that we see, so the first description of Julian Adaman is that he's dark and striking looking with brows as black as Fenella's and eyes nearly as blue and luminous as Imogen's, and he had a wide, curiously red mouth, which looked as if it was laughing all the time. Julian Adaman's red, wet mouth is something that we will be seeing a lot of throughout this book. It's obviously the thing that Sally the ghost is paying the most attention to. And the first thing that we see him do, so we see that Cart is clearly sort of into Julian Adaman, and the ghost is relieved because the ghost at this point believes that she is Sally. And for some reason, she's very relieved that it seems like Cart is the one who's into Julian Adaman. Like that is somehow going to save her from something in the future. Save her, the ghost. And we see they're all sitting around this table, and Carter's I was probably 15, I think the same age as Julian Adaman. We know that Sally is 13.
So she's described as younger because Julian's the older. So I think Cart is probably 14.
Yeah. Cart notably is we just seen her, and this also really stood out to me because she's 14. She's got described as having a adult woman's body, and she's wistfully asking if their parents might let her have a bra. which
Right,
clearly
and
she
Fenella
needs.
says no, it costs too much money.
Yeah.
The sense that the girls are they have nothing, they're given nothing, not even the very basic things they need.
And they're
Um,
certainly given nothing to help them over the horrible transition from little girlhood to womanhood, which Cart and Sally are currently experiencing and which is being miserable. But we know that Cart is at this point, and while they're all hanging around at the table, Julian Adamon reaches out and just smacks her on the bum, and everything freezes because this is scary to all of the other younger children sitting around in the room. They don't know what to do, that this has just happened, that there's presence of sexuality is in this room with them.
right, but the way Jones writes about this freeze moment from the point of view of the ghost is it's not just like a description of the people stopping, it's the whole world stops and it starts to fall apart. And it's the
Yeah.
experience of the ghost's world kind of turning into threads and the threads coming apart from each other. And behind the threads, there is something else, a grey, grubby, maggoty thing. And that
Yes.
is an image we have seen several times in these opening chapters. Firstly, in very early on, while she's exploring the world of the sisters, Sally finds what seems like one more silly children's game. And it's a little hut that they've built out of old chairs and bits of carpet in the garden. It smells fantastically horrible because it's been there for months and it's rained, so it's all mildewy and mouldy.
Yep.
Inside the hut, there is a doll. And this doll has a name. Her name is Monaghan.
Which I think it is not coincidental that this sounds like Morgan, which is
Sounds like
the
Morrigan, sounds like Morgan. I think
yep.
these are very, very intentional echoes. This is actually the first Diana Wynne Jones book in which we get a surprise King Arthur cameo.
I
Which,
know it's so
when I
funny
hit it,
that
I
this
was
is
like,
the one.
"What?" Because I think of surprise King Arthur as like a Jonesian signature move, and I was like, I can't believe it's taken us this long to get to one. Um,
Yeah,
but yes, Monaghan, this
I
Morrigan, this Morgan.
arguably you did point out that there might also be surprise King Arthur in Dalemark.
Yeah, all right. Um,
But yes, there's the Arthurian mythos deep in this book in the most unheroic and unmythic way possible. But we will get there.
right. Anyway, Sally encounters the Monaghan doll, and we have a description. Monaghan was hideous. A year in the wet hut had turned the rag face livid grey, and fungus had puckered it until it looked like a maggot. The rest of Monaghan was misshapen before she went into the hut. One time, Cart, Sally, Imogen, and Fenella had each seized an arm or a leg. Sally could not remember whether it had been a quarrel or a silly game, and pulled until Monaghan came to pieces. Then Cart, in terrible guilt, had sewed her together again, as badly as she had sewed Fenella's green sack, and dressed her in a pink knitted doll's dress. The dress was now maggot grey. To make it up to Monaghan for being torn apart, Cart had invented the worship of Monaghan.
What an origin story for a goddess.
Right. And it becomes clear that the worship of Monaghan has accidentally, maybe accidentally on purpose, tripped onto something real. That there is an ancient and powerful goddess, demon, monster, something dwelling on the downs, on the hills near the school.
Yes,
The hills which
the
are in
house.
fact called Mangan Downs. The name
Yes.
Monaghan is taken from Mangan. And this goddess has happily accepted her place as being worshipped by these children, in among many other things she's doing in different times and in different places. And the worship of Monaghan is described as lapsed. Everyone's got too uncomfortable and stopped doing it. Except it becomes really clear that it's really stuck in everyone's head all the same. And when the ghost first sticks her head into Monaghan's temple, her wet hut, she sees 3 black feathers stuck in the ground in front of the doll.
Yes.
We will later discover several more feathers stuck in, kept secretly in Sally's drawer in her bedroom, the bedroom the
Yep.
girls share, and we will discover there is a black hen that has gone missing somewhere.
Yep. And what we will also discover as Sally kind of explores her situation. You know what the other thing this is like? I don't know if Sleep No More ever made its way across the Atlantic Ocean, but Sleep No More is a a sort of interactive theater production that ran in New York for a very long time. I think it might still be running, but it's at its very end, where you, the audience member, are a ghost exploring a haunted hotel. You're given a mask. You're set to wander around and explore a haunted space as you see various scenes from Macbeth and from Rebecca playing out around you, and you get to sort of follow characters as they go from scene to scene. And this feels very much like that. Sally is the ghost exploring the scene, following players, trying to figure out what's what.
Trying to connect the dots while also being quite flatly incapable of connecting dots, so that we, the reader, get what's going on with the missing black hen and the worship of Monaghan long before Sally does.
Right, she barely pays attention to the feathers. What she does pay attention to is as she's upstairs, she sees that there's a bunch of art on the wall. The kids have put together sort of an art exhibit of all of their drawings and paintings. The worst painting is one of a mother.
Right.
Uh,
It's one that Sally's done, she's signed it, and it is a fundamentally, horrifically sentimental mother and child. We
yes.
got the
Uh,
description.
Yes, the mother was the next painting. She was stretching out her arms, not to a sink, but to a fat, simpering baby. Sally could remember painting this, and it was awful. It embarrassed her, it was so bad. The faces simpered, the colors were weak and bad, and the shapes were floppy and pointless. The mother was like an aimless maggot with a pretty face on top.
So there's our maggot image again. We've had it in the Monaghan doll, the maggoty grey, and here's the maggot who is the mother reaching for a baby. And then at the moment that Julian Adamant's sexual threat enters the scene, Sally is sort of torn away, or the world starts to fall apart. And behind this history, this sort of world that she's been exploring of the sisters, there is nothing but this grey maggoty power.
Yes. And there's a sort of web of connections I think that are all tied together by this imagery of the maggot that we see over and over again. There is Monaghan, this ancient power of worship that is toying with Sally the ghost, that is behind everything that she's seeing in the past. There is her mother, whom this idealized vision of her mother, the avenging angel that she yearns towards, who gives her purpose and identity.
Right, this
But
divine female power.
Right. And the description of what started the worship of Monaghan, there were four children, they tore her apart. To make it up for her, they started worshiping her, is such a like horrible mother myth. Um
Yep, that's a story about, oh no, we've destroyed our mother, now we must worship her forever.
yeah,
And actually,
exactly.
Phyllis does present herself to the girls as destroyed. Like, there's the sequence where she comes in when they're all in bed and she's telling them off. She's complaining about what they've been doing because they've been making a lot of noise. And she looks so tired. She's completely exhausted because she's put all her energy and all her time into running a boarding school. Um,
Yes.
being, in fact, a mother for all these hundreds of boys who are not her own children.
Yeah, oh, what's the thing she says? Okay, the boys are all away from home and they need attention. Besides, boys are helpless and girls know very well how to look after themselves. So the excuse that she gives herself for not taking care of her daughters is that her daughters are fine. They can take care of themselves, except whenever they try and take care of themselves by, for example, going to school and asking for food, they're scolded for being in a position, for making everyone's lives harder, for being sort of a parasite on their existence just for existing.
And it's noticeable, like, occasionally you get little glimpses of how this might have all appeared to an outsider. Like, there's a sequence where the ghost reads Imogen's school report that's just been left on the side gathering dust. And Imogen's got a B in music, which, given that she's supposedly going to be a concert pianist when she grows up, seems a bit strange. But also, what's actually jumps out is the like pastoral report where it says Imogen's worked really hard but still seems acutely unhappy. Please, can we discuss? And Sally the ghost is like, but Imogen's just always unhappy.
Right, why would that be notable in any way?
Right, and in fact, all the sisters are constantly describing the way Imogen behaves, where she goes silent, she starts to cry, she says everything's hopeless, she can't imagine the future, and they say, oh, Imogen's grieving again.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like, this is a pretty clear picture of somebody who is unbelievably depressed, a really, really unhappy child. Imogen's grieving, and they mock her for it. Cart tries to comfort her, the others ignore her, but it's the language that they all use around it the way they all echo the same phrasings, actually reminds me of the way Sally talks in the scene with their mother, where she starts to talk in their mother's voice, and the
Yes.
ghost figure starts to echo the things that she thinks her mother would say. It was one of Cart's silly remarks. It was one of Fenella's silly remarks.
Yeah.
So I think this language of grieving to dismiss Imogen's misery is again taken from their parents.
And, we've
Um,
talked before about how all, increasingly Jonesian protagonists, in Spellcoats, for example, and in Drowned Ammit, Jonesian protagonists always echo a little bit of the villain of the book. The villain of the book is someone that they see themselves in, someone they could become. And all of these sisters are, in one way or another, echoes of their mother. They reflect their mother, they identify with their mother. Imogen, who is the only one of the sisters who is described as beautiful as a child, she's strikingly beautiful, looks like their mother. She acts like a ministering angel. Sally has entirely adopted her mother's way of thinking about herself and her sisters and their future. Like they've all sort of taken their identities from their mother. They can't help it.
One thing that jumped out at me in sort of rereading Jones's reflections on her actual, like the distinction between the fictionalized autobiography and the actual autobiography, is actually when she talks about, we just saw it as normal.
Yeah.
I can't stress this too strongly, how ordinary this seemed. If anyone showed us a factual story at that time in which our particular problems were represented, we were bored and disregarded the story as just ordinary. Or, by the time we had reached our teens and were dimly aware that our life was by no means ordinary, we responded with acute distress. And here, actually, she's talking about the limits and the failures of the problem book as a method of writing for children. The story with a real problem, which the story will show the child how to cope with. Like, if it's just normal to the child, they don't recognize that it's a problem.
Yeah.
They're either bored or distressed by it.
And
Yeah,
the fact,
from this, I concluded very early on that it was both unproductive and unkind to write the kind of book that was a factual presentation of any social problem. Teachers are wholly insensitive to how helpless a child is before problems imposed by parents or society.
yeah. Yeah, and this is a book about helplessness. And it's also a book in which, in order to show the sort of monstrous distortion of their lives, she has to completely dissociate herself from it. She has to, rip away her own identity and memory and come to the situation with 100% new eyes and look at these figures. This is a girl who's too big for her body. This is a desperately unhappy girl. This is a very strange little girl, and force herself to recognize them and start to recognize herself in them, but to see them as these sort of almost like Edward Gorey-esque caricatures first before she situates herself inside it. And that's the only way to start seeing this situation for what it really is.
I think, how did I get onto that? I was starting to talk about the structure of the first 7 chapters of the
Right.
book.
Yes. Sorry.
All the way back then, and we got off track because there's so much to say, and I think
Right.
really necessary, especially to understand the role that Monaghan plays in the very beginning as a figure of divine motherhood, of monstrous neglect, of the threat that lies behind the scene of sexual harassment when Julian slaps Cart.
Right.
Um,
Because that is the third link between like these maggot figures, the maggot that is Monaghan, the maggot that is the idealized mother, and the maggot that is Julian Adamant.
I don't think the maggot is ever represented as him. Rather, that he opens the way for it to come in, if you like. That his
Yes.
actions are what give the maggot its power to disassociate Sally from herself. So we've got this whole long sequence of Sally the ghost as audience, as totally lacking in agency, watching these different scenes play out, and eventually, and we're still in the first half of the book, she gives up on these awful sisters who she thinks she hates, and she goes to look for Sally. Because she's discovered that the Sally of the four is not dead as she initially thought. It's actually all a cunning plan. The sisters are trying to prove to their parents they don't care and need to pay more attention by faking Sally's death. Charmingly, this plan simply doesn't work. The parents never ever notice that Sally was gone.
Nope.
I say charmingly, it's horrendous.
Yes.
It's really, really upsetting.
Yes.
But the ghost goes looking for Sally, who is actually staying over with a friend.
And this is where we sort of get the first doubt that the ghost is Sally, because the ghost expects, having decided throughout the course of these first 7 chapters that she probably is Sally. The ghost sees Sally and expects to feel a sense of kinship, a sense of instant recognition, and she feels nothing. She feels no connection to this 13-year-old.
Right. Sally, like, just looks like a normal 13-year-old girl to her, like, but there's no sense of that's me.
Yeah.
And in fact, she watches what Sally then does. And Sally has her own agenda when she's staying over at a friend's house. And the ghost watches the whole thing and goes, I don't remember any of this, and I don't see why she's doing this or what she feels about it. And what Sally does is striking, because she sneaks out in the middle of the night across the field to a stand of dead elm trees, where she meets with Julian Adaman.
Uh-huh. I think you said that this book is, in a way, a horror novel. And
I think it's horror. I think the book works on such a sense of tension and secret central monstrosity. But the secret central monstrosity, this moment at the exact midpoint of the book, is Sally's meeting as a 13-year-old with Julian Adaman, and what they then do.
yeah.
And what they then do is pretty clearly a satanic ritual or something inspired by the, if you like, the aesthetics of a satanic ritual. It's Julian who killed the black hen, and he makes fun of Sally because she was upset by it.
Yes.
Um, and he's actually got it. He's buried it in that elm grove, and he digs it up along with a bunch of chains. I think they're meant to be bicycle chains.
Yep.
And they do the ritual summoning of Monaghan that Cart wrote, but it's changed. It's been rewritten. Either Sally or Julian has added a lot of words about inflaming their souls with bloodlust that
Mm-hmm.
weren't there before.
Yeah.
And then Julian starts anointing Sally with the blood of the chicken he killed and draping the chains on her in order to dedicate her to Monaghan.
Yes. I'm just going to read this passage. Once more, the ghost threw herself at Sally and tried to make her run away. But Sally just stood there, her eyes shining and blinking quietly in the light of the candles, letting Julian Adaman drape her in heavy chains as if she was bewitched. The Monaghan feeling was in among the candles now, hanging its heavy presence on Sally, as heavy as the chains. It knew the ghost was there. It was cruelly amused at the ghost's efforts to frighten Sally. But to be on the safe side, it threw contemptuously to both the idea that this was just a game Julian Adaman was playing. As a result, Sally felt a mixture of disgust and amusement and horror. It seemed awfully silly and gruesome that the clanking chains should be sticky with hen's blood, which shone in the candlelight, mixed with rust and earth. It was a silly touch when Julian Adaman saved a separate length of chain to hang round his own neck. We have bound ourselves to thy service, O Monaghan, he said, and laughed to show it was silly.
Right. And Julian's laughter at things which are not funny has been striking before, because he laughed and said it was a joke in the sequence where he's sexually harassing Cart. And it's part of the way he keeps control of a situation is to laugh and to smile. And there's a lot of attention paid to his sort of smiling, wet
Yes.
mouth.
Oh, it's so creepy.
Uh, it's so creepy. And I think I messaged you and I said, this is a sex scene, isn't it?
It's
I think 13-year-old Sally, by implication, lost her virginity to this very nasty boy in an elm grove in the middle of the
it's
night.
certainly, yep,
It fades to
yep,
black. Like, Monaghan's power becomes so great that the ghost is totally shaken out of this entire timeline, and it ends up somewhere else. And we'll talk about that in
yeah,
a minute. But Sally and Julian are left having chained themselves, bound themselves to Monaghan's service, and sealed it with a blood sacrifice, the murder of the black hen,
yeah,
which Monaghan encourages the ghost to go and drink the hen's blood. And it's clear that doing so would be a terrible, terrible
yes.
mistake.
And it is, fundamentally, this is a scene where a 15-year-old boy takes a 13-year-old girl out into the woods and teaches her a funny little game that involves chains and blood. That is what we
Right.
know.
But also tells her also they're both treating it as a joke, as something not serious. Don't think too hard about what's happening to your body. Don't think too hard about the implications of what you're saying. Don't think about the
Yeah,
blood. I think even if it's not a sex scene, it fills the same purpose as a
right.
sex scene. And in fact, we will find out that in the future, Julian Adaman has been Sally's no good boyfriend for
Yep,
7 years.
since the events of these 2 days that the ghost is experiencing, which are so, something about this event and something about these 7 years have been so traumatic that they have completely dissociated her from her identity, which is a trauma response. She can't, looking too hard at some of these scenes, she can't witness them, she can't fully remember them, she gets shaken apart and ends up back in the future.
Right. Because this is the point at which the ghost, in absolute terror, thinks she's about to confront Monaghan. Right, the scene with Julian and Sally fades out, and she starts to see a monstrous, maggoty creature wrapped in white like a mummy, and it's disgusting, and she's horrified by it. And then sort of she slowly comes to and is like, "Oh, that's my foot."
Yeah.
It's not fade to black; it's fade to foot, which
Yeah.
I think is an extraordinarily funny cut, but also yeah, the bathos of the surprise of what actually is happening here is the Sally and the physical real Sally is in the hospital looking at her own foot, which is swathed in plaster because she is in hospital and she has been very, very badly injured. There's been an
Yes.
accident.
Yep.
We found out on page 1. There's
And
been a terrible accident.
this also is this is the third part of the link between Monaghan and their parents and Julie and Adam, right? Is that Sally is the sister who does not want to recognize and cannot recognize her parents' abuse as abuse. Whatever they want must be correct. She lets Julie and Adam hang chains about her. And I think this is really, really the same as her accepting that her parents tell her about her life is correct. She lets her parents hang chains about her, she does not protest. She lets Julian Adamant hangs chains about her, she does not protest, and she dedicates her life to Monaghan in the same way that she dedicates her future to her parents.
Right. And we discover, like almost at once, we find out more context for the accident. We are given what happened to Sally, which is that she was thrown out of a car.
Yeah.
And the way she doesn't describe it as something that happened to herself. It's like she's watching it from a distance, this disassociated trauma response. She sees an angry man arguing with a woman in a car and eventually shoving her over, throwing her out of the car door. Her foot gets caught in the seatbelt and she's dragged along the road behind the car, and then finally breaks loose and the car drives off without her.
She
And
just
this is what has happened to Sally.
Yeah, she describes this. She describes seeing the girl fall out of the car. She tumbles just like a doll helplessly to the road, and like a doll went tumbling for yards and yards. When at last her foot came loose, the car door slammed shut and the car sped away, leaving the doll-like crumpled lady lying at the side of the road. And this also is a link between Sally and Monaghan, a crumpled, abandoned doll. Sally is part of the villain of this book, or the villain of this book is part of her.
Yes, the ways in which she has sort of taken on the role of Phyllis, insisting that everything's fine, that everything's perfect, that there's nothing to be angry about here, if you
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
uh,
100%.
has made her Monaghan's servant.
Yeah. Now what I think is fun also in this sequence is even though she knows she's just watched Julian Adamant throw her out of a car, she's still thinking, but Julian Adamant isn't important. I don't really care about him. I have no emotions particularly about him. And then Cart comes to visit her. And
Actually,
what
no, I mean, Cart's not the first sister to pop in.
True,
The
true.
first sister to pop in, confusingly, appears to be Sally.
Yes.
And this is the identity destabilization point where the patient in the hospital bed goes, "Wait, what? I thought I was Sally." But she meets this very miserable, unhappy woman who looks a bit like the 13-year-old Sally,
Yes.
grown up, and goes, then wait, which one am I?
Right.
Uh, so it's not as if coming back to the future answers any of her questions. It actually makes it more confusing. She thought she was pretty sure she knew which sister she was at the midway point of the book, and now she doesn't again.
Right.
Uh,
And seeing all her sisters grown up is, this it takes her a moment, to recognize all of them as they come in one by one. When she was a little girl, she knew exactly who she was among these sisters. As an adult, she has no idea who she is.
right, but we meet the adult Cart who has gone from being this tall, fat, too big teenager to being a pretty university student. We learned that she's a student at Cambridge, So she's had the sort of brainy career path so far that her parents wanted for her, which is, of course, the brainy career path that
Mm-hmm.
Diana's parents wanted for her and which she took when she went off to Oxford.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Cart, I feel like Cart is kind of brought in to fulfill the role of, and now I shall explain some things in intelligent words. And in fact, Sally
Right.
even goes, "Can you stop being so clever?" Because she talks, because Cart analyzes Julian Adam as like, I think he represented our suicidal urges.
Right.
And you're like, thanks, Cart. Do you have any other notes on the book you'd like to give us?
Right. But it is because it's, they didn't, none of us really cared two hoots about him, even you. And it makes me wonder if Monaghan wasn't really a manifestation of our common thirst for excitement or our suicidal urges or something. So Julian Adamant and Monaghan are both just like, they're they're bad ideas, but they don't matter in and of themselves so much as how the fact that the sisters picked them up matters.
Right. It's sort of a sort of I'm trying to put how it's their externalizations of the sisters' urge to self-destruction and the urge to self-destruction, which makes it so hard to choose between the sisters to decide which one you are because they've all got it, and it's there
Right.
because they are so miserably abused and neglected by their parents. I mean, the sequence where early on, little girl Imogen hangs herself.
Yeah. Which is a real thing that Dana Jones
That's
describes as having
That's
happened.
another autobiographical episode, right? Her sister Isabel, they hung from a beam using skipping ropes. And Imogen has a similar experience in the book, and Sally is horrified because of the way that none of the sisters seem to realize she is suffocating and dying while they're doing
Yep.
this. This idea of slowly destroying yourself, trying to look pretty, and that's the goal of the hanging episode. She's trying to look like a pantomime fairy. So
Yeah, it's not a subtle metaphor.
no, it's not. Slowly destroying yourself, trying to look pretty while your sisters shout advice, and nobody notices you're dying.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Jones is allergic to subtlety. It's great.
But then the ghost realizes that she sort of is able to go back and forth. She's able to sort of push herself back into the past again, which is when we start getting these thoughts about time. What Cart says, as the ghost or the present ghost, the present day sisters sitting in bandages, healing from this horrible injury, is sort of trying to explain to her sisters what's going on. Something happened 7 years ago. I was that ghost. And Cart says, people write stories pretending you can alter the past, but it can't be done. All you can do to the past is remember it wrong or interpret it differently, and that's no good to us. But of course, it is exactly what they need to do is remember the past and interpret it correctly. Because over the course of the back half of the book, the next 7 chapters, we're skipping between the ghost going back, trying to influence events and witnessing events as they occur, and then coming forward again and talking about them with her adult sisters to try and make sense of them and try and figure out if there's a way to release Monaghan's hold on her, because Monaghan, having dedicated herself to Monaghan's service, it's been 7 years. Monaghan will take a life
Right,
unless she's cheated somehow.
right. So she's been given this opportunity somehow to see if she can save herself from Monaghan and from the power of Monaghan to claim a life after 7 years. One thing that jumps out at me actually is that this is the Jonesian thing of the adults get pulled into the action with the children.
Oh
Because the
yeah.
adults in the future, who are the adult versions of the sisters and the friends, the boys from the school, they are deeply invested in helping the children, but they can only do it by discussing and reinterpreting and advising each other on what happened in the past, what did the ghost do, and they all remember this episode, right? They all remember that the
Yes.
ghost was there and that they did something, but they're trying to figure out what exactly they did and how or why it worked, and if it's possible to change anything.
And they remember it fuzzily and imperfectly, and that leaves room for movement, I think, room for alteration. Because there's these two sort of visions of how time works, right? There's how time works for humans, for the sisters, which is you can remember things differently, you can interpret them differently, and that is the way that retelling the past can impact the past, reliving the past can impact the past. And then there's the way it works for Monaghan. Monaghan, being a goddess, exists, it said, in all time bands at once. So she is simultaneously 7 years ago and now, and in the time of her prime when she has warlords rampaging around, doing sacrifices in her honor. And all of those times are real to her. Changes can happen at all times to Monaghan. Changes cannot happen at all times to human children. And it's this sort of simultaneous, this double reality of how time travel essentially works, or how the past works, that is really interesting.
Right, it's the mythic in the everyday again, which is a Jonesian concern and has been since 8 Days of Luke. But here, the mythic and everyday running alongside each other is kind of they're running in two separate streams, where human experience of time and divine experience of time are completely different, but also strongly overlapping.
Yes. And Sally is borrowing a little bit of the divine experience of time in doing these jumps as someone who is both alive and dead, sort of
It's
simultaneously,
almost like you have to
between the
pass through
past and
death to get
present.
power.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned to you, this is the old. I was like, oh, this is the only book that's so fundamentally about death, where there's no death and water. And then eventually they go on this quest to the downs, to the barrows, and the woods around them sound like the sea. And Cart says this whole area used to be underwater. I'm like, all right, I take it back.
Yeah, because the chalk downs in where the barrows are, chalk is a formerly underwater landscape.
Yeah, but before we get to the barrows, though,
Except
well,
for the
first
barrows.
we have to do. Well, first we have to do just the ghost. I think the ghost's quest to figure out who she is, as she goes back and looks at each of her sisters. Like, all right, if I'm not Sally, who am I?
Which
Can I
one of
see
you
myself in
weirdos?
you?
Right. So this sense of doubled self. Obviously, we've got the duality of Cart Sally as self-portraits of the shouting, angry, difficult, too big teenager versus the anxious, trying hard to be good, hates you all teenager.
Yeah,
So that's a doubled self, right? But also, especially once the ghost has encountered the adult versions of sisters and is trying once again to identify herself among them, we have the doubled self, which is the sibling. The I'm
yeah,
you and you're me of we have these shared experiences. You and I understand each other, are the same in some way. Am I you? Could I be you? Which one of you am I?
yes. There's the, I've reading Four Quartets broke me, because now I keep hitting these moments and thinking, what are you here? Uh,
Well, see, I'm
um,
I'm broken too, but like in a less highbrow way because I have been replaying Persona 5, which I told you, and the key Persona is explicitly a video game series about the Jungian self. There's a cutscene about it. But the key word of the sequence are "I am thou, thou art I," and I keep going, "Oh,
uh-huh.
we did it again!
We
I
did
am thou and thou
it
art I." But right, so Sally goes on a quest as the ghost. Well, the ghost who thinks she might not be Sally after all goes on a quest to find out who she is, and this time the children are aware that she's there. They manage to figure it out, and the clue is actually the family dog keeps both growling and whining affectionately at her.
Right. The family dog knows that she's one of the sisters, but also it's very weird.
Right.
Uh,
But it is also noticeable, like, Fenella can always tell when the ghost is there.
yes.
And Cart could usually tell, and Imogen can't seem to tell at all. Uh, and Imogen is the one who's actually most scared of the ghost. But the point is,
Yes.
at this point, we actually do have a classic that Jones hasn't done for a while. Somebody picks up a book and goes, I know the story we need!
Yup.
And it's
Yup.
Cart, the brainy older sister, grabs the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Aeneid, and goes, it's in one of these, I know it is. You, boys, so she turns to the boys who are at this fancy school with their Latin teacher father, which of these books is it where they talk to the dead? And the boys don't know, and Cart's like, I thought you were having a classical education! Which is great.
And
Very
then
funny moment. And
we'll
then,
say,
but Cart, I will say, as a person who has had a classical education, it's the Odyssey. She is talking about a sequence in the Odyssey where Odysseus performs a blood sacrifice, fills a trench in the earth with blood, and uses it to summon the ghosts of the dead from the underworld and give them the power to speak. And this is what the children decide to do. They decide to do some Odyssean witchcraft.
yep. And so they send out a general request for blood from the students of the school. It is perhaps the funniest sequence in the book is the blood sacrifice. It's small boys turning up demanding to be punched in the nose for the price of £1.40, which the girls don't have, so they write out endless IOUs while
They
10-year-olds stand
end up owing
around.
about £60, which is we are post decimalisation now, but only just. This is quite a lot of money.
Uh-huh. And all of these 10-year-olds are standing around in a circle, dripping hopefully into a bowl.
Right. And Fenella goes and steals some ox blood from the kitchen, and that goes in the bowl. And the girls actually cut themselves open and drip blood from their wrists into the bowl. There's quite a funny sequence of Cart trying to do it and be like, why is it so hard to cut your wrist? People are doing it in myths all the time.
Right, that is one of the, the ways of committing suicide, which,
Right.
again, suicide
The
is an
suicidality keeps
underrunning
coming
theme.
back.
Yeah.
It's the as the underlying theme. So you get this sort of group collection of an enormous bowl of blood, and the ghost is watching that. This is horrifying. This is really disgusting. I
Yeah.
don't want anything to do with this giant bowl of blood. And in fact, because the girls have made such a huge fuss about collecting all this blood, they get caught.
Yes.
And there is both funny and horrible sequence where their father himself turns up, and first the boys have to hide, and one of them ends up hiding under the kitchen sink with two girls standing in front of him to hide that he's there, because they're meant to be in lessons right now.
Uh-huh.
And meanwhile, himself is trying to tell off the girls, but the way he's found out is the school cook has realised what happened, and she's called him in, and himself is longing, and it's, the book says he wanted to hit them and call them bitches, but he's not going to do it in front of the servant. So there's this really, really nasty tension of all the girls know that this man is violent when he's angry. They're all waiting for it to happen. Everyone's waiting for it to happen, but it's super clear that he can actually control himself, and he is choosing to control himself to protect his own status. But if there was no one watching, if he had the power of isolating these girls, he would be hurting them.
Yes.
I think himself is the actual villain of the book.
Yes.
The portrayal of him is largely comic, but there's a moment later on when Sally says she's spent the 7 years since the dedication trying to please himself and Julian Adaman, and eventually realizing that she can't please himself because he just doesn't care enough, so she spends her whole time trying to be everything Julian Adaman wants her to be.
Yeah. And so this is the only time that we actually see their father interacting with the girls. He's a presence throughout, a background presence throughout the back of the book. They hope that their mother is going to come help them. They never expect that their father is going to come. Sally yearns towards him and is afraid of him. The one time we actually see him there is when he's about to shout and rage and call them bitches.
We have seen glimpses of him with the boys, and I think it's pretty clear that as a teacher he's very good. He gets on well with his students. They like him. They make jokes with him. Like there's a moment where he snaps at a student. The student comes up with a comical response, and someone in the back of the room whispers, 15 all. It's a game. It's fun. It echoes actually a moment where the ghost has seen older boys playing tennis against each other. Because of course tennis score. But also we've seen himself sort of going out with a group of boys and a metal detector to investigate a possible Roman horde that he's heard about, and eventually he's going to dig up this metal that's been found that is Julian Adaman's chains and the dead chicken.
And this scene with the girls,
he's having a great time. The whole time we see him in the school, laughing at the school stuff, taking care of the boys. There's a side of him that Sally is deeply drawn to and admires. Jones writes about her own father that he ran this conference center that ran courses for young people, and she describes him as an educator and entertainer who could hold a room, and she says that himself is a portrait, and I think it's quite a quite heartbreaking portrait of this man who is capable of being charming, expansive, delightful, but none of it's ever for you.
Yeah. And we also see the echo of that. So all of the girls echo their mother, but Cart also specifically echoes their father. And there's this really, really interesting contrast where we see adult Cart, and Sally thinks, oh, I've misjudged Cart, and, thinking all these horrible things about her in the past, or I'm thinking horrible things about all my sisters.
Adult Cart is a good and loving sister, and Sally thinks she's wonderful and is like deeply warm when Cart says, listen, Cart actually says, look, I see you this badly injured, and it reminds me how much I love you. You have got to save yourself. You've got to get back there and be the ghost.
Right.
And then she gets back, and the first thing she sees is teenage Card, who has inherited their father's awful temper and is absolutely kicking off because she's woken up and she's a bad morning person.
Right.
Uh,
And she is, it's comic, but she is raging. She is a physical threat. The other sisters are scared of her. She rampages downstairs. She destroys some furniture because she wants to get her hands on the other girls for waking her up, and she can't. This is, I think you said, and I think you're right, that this is another echo of Ogre. This book is an echo of Ogre Downstairs. It's a rewriting of Ogre Downstairs to get it, make it harsher and more bloody and more real. And Cart is the Douglas here. Cart
like
is,
the bestial eldest who is both a protector and a threat.
yes, and that's their father, except that the difference between, as with Douglas and the ogre, the difference between Cart and their father is that when she is not being terrifying and raging, she does listen and pay attention, and tells this, can tell this, knows the sisters in deeply as the people that they are, which is something that their father, who can't even get their names right, and actually in this scene they call him out for it because he rampages in and starts yelling at them all indiscriminately. He does not notice that Sally is not there, but he mentions her name several times because he can't tell the difference between his daughters. And Fenella tries to call him out on it.
It's great.
And
I love every moment when Fenella is the most honest of the girls. She just doesn't waste time lying. She's like, yeah, you don't know who we are, do you? It's
yeah,
brilliant.
it's funny because it's said several times about Fenella that Fenella doesn't know how to explain things. It is physically difficult for her to explain things straightforwardly. But in many ways, she is the most straightforward. She just says what she thinks. And she doesn't think necessarily the way other people think. I think that Fenella has a little bit of that sort of the sideways child, the child who thinks in a different way that we see in the Crestomancy books. But what that comes out is her being sort of more direct and knowing where the ghost is, seeing exactly what their parents are at all points, and just not bothering, not being able to explain it in the way other people might expect to hear it.
Right. Anyway, blood sacrifice is where we
Blood
were.
sacrifice.
And we're in the sort of the comically awful telling off sequence, which ends with Cart ordered to get rid of the blood. And she does like a very silly subterfuge where she manages to hide the blood and get a different bowl and pours that bowl ostentatiously out in the garden. But they save the blood!
They
And
save the
then they
blood.
do a ritual! And Cart is high priestess. Cart, every time there is some kind of ritual moment in the book. Earlier, they tried to exorcise the ghost. Cart grabbed her prayer book and started reading out common prayers. Cart leads the ritual of giving the ghost this blood sacrifice so that it can speak. And the ghost is appalled.
Right.
The ghost doesn't want to do it.
It's so gross.
Right, it's disgusting. But I found this sort of really striking as a reframing, as a sort of as an example of the idea of the reframe, the reinterpretation, which changes the past. The ghost suddenly sort of flashes back to the future, where she can hear the doctors and nurses around her as she is very seriously injured, calling for more blood. And she, when she's back in the past, she suddenly newly understands the gifts of blood from her sisters and all these schoolboys as a transfusion, a
Yeah.
donation. Here is life given to you by other people in a desperate attempt to save you.
Yeah.
It's a blood sacrifice in the noblest possible way, which is the exact opposite of what Gillian Adaman did when he killed the black hen because he wanted to kill a black hen, when he indulged in violence and cruelty for its own sake. So
Yeah.
this blood sacrifice, Sally drinks the blood, or the ghost takes the blood and manifests to the children and explains the problem. Kind of.
Kind of. It's she comes through like a bad television signal, a strange broken mutter and moaning pieces of words. And she says things like Monaghan, Monaghan, help future now, only you, help blood Monaghan, 7 years, help life, dying, 7, help. Which isn't very helpful.
Right, but it is just enough information to really worry the sisters and their friends, and they organise an expedition to placate Monaghan. They're going to go out to Monaghan's place on Mangan Downs. They're going to ride out there on their bikes, and they're going to make offerings to Monaghan to try to redeem Sally's life.
And it's all the central characters. It's the 4 sisters. It's the 3 boys. It's also poor Audrey, Sally's friend, who she kind of befriended in order to have an excuse to spend a night away from home, and is now vigorously shedding, having decided that it wasn't much fun to spend a night at her place, and she wasn't very interested in her anyway. But she's
Right. The
along for
only
the
the
ride.
only reason Audrey is involved in any of this is that she was an excuse for Sally to be somewhere she could sneak out to meet Julian Adamant.
Right. And they all go and they all attempt to sacrifice something to Monaghan in order to try and placate her and ask her to exchange these things for a life.
And this is when we go up on the Barrow Downs,
Yeah.
which is positively Tolkienian, and they call it the dreamscape, and it is a dreamscape, and it's very beautifully described. Jones is sometimes at her best describing in this book, like some of the colors, the shapes. Even just read the opening chapter. Like, everyone can read the essay I wrote on it. You can link it in the description. I have a lot of feelings about this book. It's astonishingly well described, and of course, our ghost character is eventually revealed to be an artist or to desire art. And we've seen like little glimpses of Sally the artist all the way through, including her very, very bad drawing of a mother.
Yes. And we've also seen a very, very good drawing that she did that she feels no connection to at all and doesn't recognize. And I think that is
Yeah.
also really, really striking to me in this portrait of Sally, how instantly she recognizes her bad art and how disconnected she feels from her good art.
Right. Are you only the worst art you've ever made? Are you only all your most embarrassing and sentimental impulses? Is there
Yeah.
anything in you that's actually good?
Yeah.
So they go out to the downs and they go past the barrows, and the ghost is able to perceive that all these barrows are haunted.
Yeah,
They're
it's so
haunted
this is
by,
real horror. It's
yeah,
she began to see things sliding and changing and dissolving in the gas. These were things which had been done in honor of Monaghan. Dim blood flowed, an axe and now a knife glinted as it struck. Phantom mouths opened to scream. All these and hundreds of others like them melted and moved and reappeared as they went down the slope.
right. So that is like on their way to this like sacrificial center of Monaghan's place. But even before that, they're going past the ghosts, and the ghosts are actually sending up alarms and warning Monaghan that they're there. So that they're surrounded by Monaghan's power and Monaghan's servants on all sides, and it is very, very, very creepy.
Yes.
But the children mostly do it. They get to the Monaghan's place and they make sacrifices, and the ghost is able to recognize that Monaghan takes the sacrifices even though they aren't good enough and they won't save the ghost's life. She's going to
Yes.
take what she wants anyway. But because Monaghan is cruel and Monaghan doesn't play fair, she takes everything, she gives you nothing in return. And the only child who refuses to take part in this is Imogen, who goes, "This is creepy, you're all horrible," and she leaves. She
Well,
runs
she's not
away.
the only child who refuses to take part. Sally and Julian also don't take part. Sally and
They've,
Julian
they've
will
already
not
done it.
lift. Yep. They've
They've
made their
already
sacrifice.
they've already made their sacrifices, but right, all the others sacrifice various things or try to. The only thing Monaghan refuses is the family dog, because
Yes.
he's got got a bad leg, which means he's an imperfect offering. He's not good enough.
Right. And the rest think they're sacrificing small things, but of course Monaghan works on the level of the symbolic. So Howard, one of the boys, has a gold tie pin with a Union Jack on it, which he throws in. He says sacrifice of gold. And in the future, Howard has moved to Canada. He has been kicked out of the UK because he sacrificed his UK tie pin to Monaghan.
Right, he's lost his homeland because, and we in fact find out that he was very unhappy about this and tried to run away from home when it happened, but he couldn't escape. Monaghan took what he gave her without realizing he was giving it, and in the same way, Audrey has been picking a bunch of flowers with Ned, just casually. She throws down the bunch of flowers, and we discover she then spends the next 7 years bitterly, humiliatingly in love with Ned, who never returns her feelings.
Because Ned has drawn a picture of Sally, which he's thrown into the ring, and Sally sees that the thing that he sacrificed is the picture of her, and it's like, oh, that's why he's always so interested in getting coffee with me.
Right. And Fenella also makes a sacrifice, and she sacrifices a bit of her brain. She says just the part that girls do A levels with,
Yep.
so her academic ability.
Yeah.
But the ghost is watching all this in horror and despair because it's just not good
It's
enough.
not good enough. And
And
she
they
goes
go
back
on.
to the future and tells them all it wasn't good enough. Nothing we did was enough.
And at this point, the book's actual heroine turns up. And I would say that this book does have a heroine, and it is not Sally. Sally is, again, our viewpoint character, our protagonist, but she is neither particularly. There's not much to admire in her, let's say. And I think that's intentionally a very cruel portrait of who Sally is and how many ways she's failed. But there is a character who consistently has been the most moral, who stands up to Julian Adamant on multiple occasions.
The only one
Who
who's not fascinated by him.
Right, who sees through him, who sees through their parents. And this character is Imogen, the acutely unhappy Imogen. It's worth
The
noticing, actually, that Jones dedicated this book to her sister Isabel.
Yes,
It is
absolutely.
Imogen who now reappears in the future and says, listen, there's one more thing that we can do. You have got to get that ghost to go back and make me do a sacrifice.
And it's notable at this point that as we've seen the sisters in the past and the future, Cart and Fenella are introduced as monstrous as children, and when they first show up as adults, they are beautiful, they are happy, they are glamorous. They are, in fact, I think, strikingly, perhaps Diana Wynne Jones's most positive portrait of beautiful and glamorous adult women that we will ever meet.
Yeah,
I think
it's all right if she's your sister.
right. She looks at Cart in, looking so fashionable and hot in her like university jeans. Is like, it was awesome. It was a reflection of the confidence that she felt inside showing outside. And Fenella shows up in makeup and in glam clothes and having cajoled money out of himself for it. And the editor is like, you go, Fenella, this is wonderful. But Imogen, who is beautiful as a child, is drab and miserable and unhappy as an adult.
In fact, this is the thing that caused confusion for Sally when she saw adult Imogen the first time. She went, that must be Sally.
Right.
Because that can't be Imogen.
Right.
So wait, who am I? But no, the patient in the bed, the ghost, the girl who is doomed to die 7 years after dedication was always Sally. And it was Sally who spent 7 years hung up on Julian Adamant, Sally who got thrown out of the car. But it's Imogen who's grown from this very unhappy child to a just miserable, depressed adult woman who is currently at the music college,
Yep.
learning to be a concert pianist.
Despite the fact that one of the things that we've learned in going back is that Imogen, despite having great technical skill at music, doesn't play music like it's alive. There's a scene where Sally the ghost is hearing Imogen practice, and they actually start talking. It's one of the few moments when Imogen can kind of hear her, and they have this conversation, semi-conversation. And Sally's like, well, why don't you play it? You have to play it with more feeling, or you have to practice more. And Imogen goes, I think I hate it. And then someone else comes in, the conversation is interrupted, and Imogen realizes there's no one there. This is actually a really similar portrait, I think, to the portrait of Lenina in Cart and Quitter. It's a beautiful but very unhappy woman who is being forced into a musical lifestyle and someone else's vision of her future that she does not want.
And it's also how Jones talks about her sister Isabel and their mother's sort of vision for her as a child that she would one day be a ballerina. Eventually it becomes clear that Isabel was never cut out for this career at all. It was just what their mother said.
Yeah, and there is a bit of rewriting and reinterpreting the past here on multiple levels, because what she says about Isabel is that there was a night when Isabel was told by one of her teachers that she would never be a professional ballerina, and it was the word, it was a horrible night. She was depressed, and Diana Wynne Jones thought that she might die. Like, she was frightened by how upset she was. But in the past, Sally is able to go back and convince Imogen to make a heroic sacrifice, the supreme sacrifice, the sacrifice of her music career.
It's brilliant, actually, this whole sequence. Firstly, it's the one moment where the sort of mythic world of the past fully penetrates into the future, because what happens is not the ghost goes back to Imogen and convinces her, but they manage to bring time close enough together that as the little girl Imogen is brought forward into that hospital room with all these adults around her saying, this is what you've got to do. And it's the adult Imogen who turns to her and says, you know what to do, you know what you have to give.
Yeah. And she does. Imogen goes back and she knows how to talk to Monaghan. She knows how to sell it in the way that none of the others do. She says, the supreme sacrifice, it's better than a life. I'm going to give you honor and glory. You'll get cheers from the masses and the applause of the audiences. You'll win prizes and have people writing your life story with all sorts of glorious experiences for you and other people. I'm going to give you years of hard work and the prospect of my serene profile contemplating beauty and relaying it to others. The rise of my beauty into the limelight. I'm giving you my musical career.
Right. And we've seen again and again, right, that Monaghan cheats. She does not play fair. What's great about this climactic sacrifice is that Imogen is cheating too.
Yeah,
Because even at age 12, she knew perfectly well she didn't want this musical career. She didn't like it. She hates it. And also, it's completely made up. It's perfect because it's made up.
it's
Uh,
all in her imagination.
that's right. And Sally is then able to say to Monaghan, but I'm not a perfect offering, am I? I'm all in bits.
Right. This is perfect. There's nothing wrong with it at all because it's a dream concocted
Right,
by a little girl and her mother between them.
right. And Monaghan accepts Imogen's sacrifice, uh, which releases the adult Imogen from having to be a musician, which she hates.
Right. It's a
Uh,
reinterpretation of the past. She has real, in the 7 years in the future, and only 7 years in the future, she's able to look back and be like, I already gave this up. I don't have to do this.
right. And at that point, Sally knows she is going to recover. She is going to survive.
Yeah.
She's escaped from Monaghan's bargain. She's not going to be killed.
And she's also survived. So Sally and Imogen are mirrored as much as like Sally and Cart are the two halves of Diana Wynne Jones, but Sally and Imogen are mirrored. They are both frustrated artists. They've been living together. They're both very unhappy as adults, and there's this description of the two of them living in a flat together, kind of mirroring their own unhappiness and frustration back at each other. Imogen's grieving, Sally's self-doubt, which the book, she has this period of I don't know whether all these sacrifices were worth it to save me, and everyone goes, oh, come off it, in the same way they go, oh, come off Imogen's grieving. It's a different kind of depression, but they're both very depressed. And Sally realizes that she does love art. She loves, the one thing that she can think of that's good about herself is that one good painting that she did. And she wants to go on and make more paintings. The fact that she wants to do more art is what's going to push her through to survival.
Yes. And in fact, it's the art made out of the horrible experience she's just had. She wants to paint the things
Yeah.
she's seeing as a ghost.
Yeah.
She wants to reinterpret them with her adult artistic skills. And there's this triumphant, this heroic moment of, yes, I am going to live and I'm going to paint. I'm going to live and I'm going to write, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. That is I think the way in which Sally most profoundly reflects the girl that Diana Wynne Jones is always writing, the little girl who is an artist, who is a creator, and who is using her powers of creation to remake the past.
But then, of course, we do get a punchline,
Yes,
which
we
is
get
that
two punchlines.
Monaghan cheated too. Monaghan said she'd take a life 7 years from that night of dedication. She didn't say whose.
Yeah.
And we discover at the very end of the book that Julian Adamant crashed his car up on Mangan Downs and died in the crash.
Bye,
Um,
Julian Adamant. No one cared enough to try
no
and
one
save
cares.
you.
No one's sad. Nobody bothered trying to save you. You never got to be a ghost because you were never good enough to think about the past, to
You
reinterpret the
never
past.
mattered at all. That I think is the most profound thing about Julian Adamant,
Yeah,
is that he
he's
did not matter. But the
right.
other
He
thing, this happens one page before. What's happened is their mother has finally turned up. Um,
right.
she's finally turned up. She's managed to get away from the school because even though she didn't drop everything to run up when she heard that her
No,
daughter was
she
on the
finished
brink of
all her
death.
work first. She had to pack all the boys' suitcases at the end of term.
But she
Uh,
did come because she does love Sally in her
right,
own.
she comes with tears in her eyes. She kisses Sally, and it hurts.
Yeah.
And
And
she says
she
she's going to come and stay in Sally's flat, and Sally's horrified.
Right. And she brings the one thing that she remembers Sally caring about, which is the Monaghan doll. She says,
Yeah,
I thought I found this and thought you might want it. Uh,
yeah.
and Sally was
It's
she had not. So in
yeah,
the
right. The total failure of understanding at the end. That her mother has kept this doll safe all these years. She's stored it in the linen cupboard. She's clearly dried it, washed it, tenderly looked after this doll, which represents failed mother love.
Yeah. So in the last pages of this book, it's this striking contrast because we have the triumph. Imogen and Sally have freed themselves from the curse of Monaghan, the curse of their mother's expectations. Perhaps they're going to live, they're going to find things that they
Right.
care about, and it's
There's the
triumphant.
bit early on where the ghost says, why no, it's not the ghost, I think it's one of the it might even be Imogen says, why am I cursed with sisters? And that's the
Right.
book, right? Are you
Yeah.
cursed with sisters or are you cursed with your sisters?
Exactly. So they've broken the curse. It is a happy ending. But also on the last page, we have these three things linked together again. We have their mother, and we have Monaghan, and we have Julian Adaman, who's just crashed himself to death in the woods.
Right. So there's a triple monster of abuse,
Yeah.
of neglectful abuse. You talked to me about collective self, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
About the self that you make by defining yourself with and around and against other people.
and the self that Sally makes out of Monaghan and her mother and Julian Adaman is so hollow, so empty, that at the start of the book she's a ghost. There's
Yeah.
nothing left of her. And I think that the implication is she was a ghost as her adult self as well.
Oh,
There
a
was
hundred
nothing
percent.
inside her. The By letting herself be defined by these abusers, she shrunk down into nothing.
Yeah.
And it was by rediscovering the love of her sisters, how much they love her, how much they're willing to sacrifice for her, how much their friends love her and are willing to sacrifice for her, because Ned and Will, just as important, Ned and
Yeah.
Will Howard.
The fact that they see her as someone who is worth sacrificing for and worth loving allows her to start to see herself that way. It's
Yes.
reinterpreting the past in a
Yes.
really powerful way. It's so good.
Yes. So this is the book where Diana Wynne Jones makes her own spell code out of the pieces of her past, her own story turned into art, reinterpreted through art, divided up into multiple selves,
Yeah.
and
And after this,
recreating a self out of it.
it is so raw and so real that I think, we're not supposed to look forward, but I will cheat a little bit and say
We
after
always
this,
cheat.
it is nearly 2 decades before she ever writes about sisters again. She writes a lot about siblings, but never about sisters.
Right. It does feel a little bit like she's exercised something here. A
Yeah.
personal ghost, perhaps.
Yeah. Shall we call it there?
Let's call it there.
Awesome. Oh, and sorry, real quick. Next week we'll be doing Homeward Bounders. We're going to have a guest appearing for the first time on that one, so look forward to it. Okay, so we had to come back here real quick because we realized we forgot to talk about King Arthur.
Right, and you can't not talk about King Arthur. So, just at the very, very end of Time of the Ghost, on her way to find Imogen, the ghost encounters another barrow. And she's seen the tombs of Monaghan's servants up on the downs. This is not like that. This is a barrow that she finds in a quiet woodland, which she describes as being like a church. And she encounters the ghost who lives in it. And it's the
Yeah.
ghost of a king. And he's waiting. He's waiting for something. He's waiting for someone to come and wake him up. He asks, "Are you here to get me? Are you here to wake me up?" And she says, "No, I don't know who you are. Who are you?" And there's this awful pause, and the ghost says, "I have forgotten."
Yeah.
And this is our first King Arthur cameo, I think.
Yeah. And it is so striking to me that this is a reflection of Sally. It's Sally's future. This is what happens if you're a ghost for too long. You forget who you are. You're lost and dissociated.
You're left permanently dead, lurking in Monaghan's shadow. And Monaghan is the only thing this ghost remembers, and he is afraid of her. And we said, didn't we, that Monaghan as Morrigan as Morgan feels like a very intentional echo.
Yes. And Sally sees this ghost and recognizes it as it's another echo of our heroine Sally, who is another echo of our author, and it's the heroic ideal. It as a haunting.
Yeah. Right, that's the King Arthur bit. See you next week.
Yeah, see you next week.